You know, it's been like a month and a half since the last time I used Switch 2 in a video title, and that's mostly because I've been much more, I guess, careful about what I decide to go over when it comes to this system, because, to be honest, I think we're getting pretty close to Nintendo preparing to reveal it in a more meaningful way, of course, since we're sort of expecting it in the first half of 2025, so, I mean, from June on, it's kind of like, all right, Nintendo, when are you going to start really going over and talking about this thing? But we'll see what they do with their shareholders stuff they're reporting and that sort of thing coming up in about 2 weeks. But also, a lot of the information coming out has been kind of sketchy for the most part. And I'm like, it's not really even worth going over. But occasionally a report does come through where I look at it and say, okay, that seems like something that's worth taking a look at. And today, that's what we're going to be doing. We're taking a look at a new report that's actually been issued this week that even talks about something outside of just how powerful this system will be. And that's actually something I've become more interested in, because I sort of think that's where that weird factor, that curveball, is going to lie with Nintendo, where they try to change things up a bit going into next generation. So if you guys enjoy the video, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe if you're new, and we're going to start today with this video sponsor. Today's video is sponsored by Factor. Ladies and gentlemen, the summer months are fast approaching, meaning now is the perfect time to start meeting your nutritional goals and be ready for beach season. Factor makes it easy with delicious, ready-to-eat meals delivered straight to your door. Simply choose from their menu of over 35 options every week, including keto, calorie smart, vegan, plus veggie, and more. I like to try different meals all the time, and Factor gives me the opportunity each week to pick and choose different combinations while letting me skip the grocery store line. You can get as much or as little as you need, choose between 6 to 18 meals every week, and you're able to reschedule or pause your deliveries at any time. When you're ready to eat, it just takes 2 minutes to prepare a Factor meal in the microwave, and cleanup is a breeze. I like having a Factor meal for lunch since it gets me back on with my day quickly without resorting to takeout. Snacks and smoothies are also available if you want something that will fit a more on-the-go lifestyle. Head to Factor75.com or click the link below and use code SpawnWave50 to get 50% off your first Factor box and 20% off your next box. That's code SpawnWave50, Factor75.com. Get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next box while your subscription is active. Thanks to Factor for sponsoring today's video. But yeah, definitely a big shout out to Factor. They've been supporting the channel for quite a while now. But we're going to be taking a look at this report from Vandal. Vandal was pretty much correct, just about 100%, minus like one or two things when it came to the Switch OLED, and their information appears to be coming from several manufacturers of accessories and peripherals for Nintendo's consoles. And, well, if you're going to be making, say, shells or screen protectors or extra controllers going next to it, you will need to at least have some information as to the dimensions of the console to start at least drafting up preliminary plans and that sort of thing. And in fact, Vandal, that's how they got information about the OLED, telling us that it was an OLED screen, and then also that it was going to be a larger screen than what we had previously by eliminating those bezels around it, but keeping the same size. And they were completely accurate on that. They even told us about the kickstand on the back and the way that the SD card would shift slightly to where rather than going north and south pushing into it, it would actually be going sideways. So a lot of things they were completely accurate on, even down to those little fine details. So when they have a report around this new system, I am inclined to believe that their sourcing is correct on some of this stuff. So what exactly that they have to say. For starters, the Switch 2, we'll call it for now, will be larger than the current Switch, but won't necessarily be the same size as the Steam Deck, which, as we know, it's pretty big, right? The Steam Deck is bordering on the idea of just being even portable. Like, technically it is because, right, it runs on a battery, but it's not pocket-sized. Although the Switch isn't necessarily pocket-sized either. I guess you could take the Joy-Cons off and then kind of fit it into like a cargo shorts or something, but it's not necessarily something that's going to just drop in your front pocket and you're good to go. You're going to put it in a bag and sort of carry it around, so it's kind of where we are when it comes to technology. The more powerful it gets, seemingly the larger it gets as well. But alongside of that, it appears we could be working away from the current Joy-Cons, and I'm actually thrilled to hear that, but the thing that's tripping a lot of us up is the idea of also working away from how we know Joy-Cons to connect to the Switch currently, which are with those rails. So they say instead of the rails of the current console, the new Switch 2 controllers would join the screen of magnetic form, essentially using magnets in some way for it to connect. Now, they also go on and mention that the current Pro controller would work with the system. So that does play into the idea of backwards compatibility, and that's great to hear. But I would also like to see some sort of, I guess, step up or just revision, next generation version of the current Pro controller. Not that there's anything wrong with it. I mean, the thing came out in 2017 and it still feels current. Like, the controller still feels really good to use. But I would like to see them take a step in the direction of analog triggers, just as something to throw in there for another feature they can work on, because I think that would help out a lot, obviously, with racing games, or even if they want to do GameCube compatibility, say with NSO in the future, you would want to have those analog triggers in order to mimic what the GameCube was doing even back then in 2001. But either way, getting away from the current Joy-Cons, I think, is needed, basically, for Nintendo, considering they're still facing a lot of stuff with Joy-Con drift, where these class action lawsuits are all over the place. And I just think the Joy-Cons are a nice first-generation idea and product from Nintendo, and is something that I wanted them to build on going forward. So, for example, the joysticks themselves have limited travel. Well, now we see all these PC handhelds that have just normal sticks, ones that are much closer to what we have on a regular control with an Xbox or PlayStation controller. So it works better for things like first-person shooters. And then also, I do wonder if... So the reason the Joy-Cons are kind of the way that they're situated in terms of their button layout was because Nintendo had the idea that you would take them off of the Switch and you would hand one to another person. Tell me in the comments if you use that regularly, or if you've ever done that, like just handed somebody the left Joy-Con to use and you'd use the right one, or vice versa. I've never really used it in that way, mostly because it's a terrible configuration. Now, technically, the current Joy-Cons could still work with the system, and they could technically keep that going, that concept, but I'd like them to work away from that, mostly because I want to see them put a D-pad back on the Joy-Con. And that, I think, was the biggest thing that kept them away from it, and just having 4 buttons, was the fact that a D-pad would not work as like a standalone controller to press all the different buttons while you're playing. Now, obviously, a lot of people are trying to figure out exactly what they mean by magnets, and I kind of wonder if people are thinking the way that this would attach is you would take the Switch, it has a magnet on one side, and the Joy-Con would have a magnet, and that's how it would just join together. It would just stick just like that. So you would completely rely on the magnet itself to hold it all together. I don't actually think that's the case. So if I had to take a guess, and again, that's kind of what we're speculating on this, I think there's still going to be some sort of guidance mechanism in place. So not necessarily like the railings, and this is something I think is good and will make the product feel more quality, is the idea of working away from the railings and then the button that unlatches it. I think if you get to a position where you have a magnet that kind of replaces that button and that lock-in, and it's basically a way for the system to grab the next generation Joy-Cons and just sort of adhere it to the system while still having some sort of guide there, whether it's a railing or maybe a couple of clips for the plastic, I think that would actually be a lot better to make it just feel seamless, whether it's taking the Joy-Con off or dropping it on. Oh, and here's the weird part. The thing that really gets me about this whole thing, how do you think Nintendo showed up with this new system for manufacturers of accessories without actually showing them the system? According to Vandal, they had a strategy. Again, this is the part that I looked at. I said, that is just outright weird. But to me, it almost adds believability to this report, because I can completely see Nintendo doing something. Like, this feels like a Nintendo thing to do. They say that the company would have allowed them to put their hands in an opaque box so that they can understand its dimensions and design without compromising the secrecy surrounding any new video game hardware. So the idea is Nintendo sends a couple of executives, or I guess the accessory manufacturers send their own executives, and they meet up with them, and they put a box on the table and tell them they can put their hands into the box, but they cannot take whatever's in the piece of hardware out or look into the box. They can just hold the system with their hands, feel around the system, and that's how they're going to get the dimensions. It sounds weird. Like I said, it is weird. But it does seem like something Nintendo would do. Can you imagine having to go there and they just put a box on the table and they say, reach in and grab what's in there? and then the whole time the businessman is just making eye contact with you the whole way to see your reaction to grabbing this new system. I was trying to think of what they would be trying to cover up necessarily, and I guess there are a few things. I mean, things that you wouldn't necessarily be able to tell by holding the system, but if you looked at it, you'd see it. It could be cameras being embedded in the bezel itself, right? Like you wouldn't necessarily feel that if it's sort of behind the digitizer, but that's what a weird thing to do. Maybe the button configuration, although you'd feel that too. It's hard to say. It's Nintendo, but this actually makes me believe this Vandal report more than before hearing this. There is another report that seemed to come out hours after Vandals, and this one, I'm less confident, to the point where I feel like a lot of this is speculation, as they're even kind of floating the idea that this new system from Nintendo could still make it out in 2024. Everything I've been hearing has been said, I would not count on that, okay? I would not. It does sound like Nintendo is working to have, as you would expect, games. Shocking, I know, but they want to have stuff to put next to the system to sell along its first year, because that, as Nintendo found out with the Switch, was incredibly important, since Mario Kart 8 Deluxe keeps selling. It was the #1 game in Japan last week in the sales charts, and that came out a month after the Switch released. So while I know that is obviously an outlier, it still shows the fact that if you get that launch year right, with Breath of the Wild still selling, with Mario Odyssey still selling, you can have just complete success all the way through the generation. And if you have a strong first year's output, you're going to have a very strong launch for the system. So naturally, that's kind of what we would figure Nintendo would be holding it back for, is the software. But a lot of the other stuff they mention here has to do with Samsung supplying a large majority of the parts. And yeah, that does make sense. But from there, there's also discussion around the process node and the display being OLED. And it seems like they're citing sources that I do question and wonder if it comes down to more speculation and educated guesses. So that's why I'm like not as confident in a report like this versus Vandal, who I actually think is getting good sourcing with manufacturing for the accessories. But let me know what you guys think about this report down below with the Switch 2 and these Joy-Cons using magnets to attach to the system, and Nintendo showing up with a box and telling the manufacturers to feel around and see what they think. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.